Okay.
5 seconds. 5 seconds rule. Hi. Good afternoon or good evening, good morning, depending on where you're joining or watching this webinar from. How open source fuels DevOps, a combined webinar between Qentinel and Eficode, two international companies based out of Finland. I am Nikhil Sharma. I'm working as a product manager at Qentinel. We decided to run this, or we had actually had a trial session with these two gentlemen there. And in our trial session, we spoke over 1 hour. So we decided to keep it in a very communicative, interactive format, more of a panel discussion than a typical webinar. So slides are what they are, but focus on what we speak or choose your ways. So a brief about Qentinel. Qentinel is a robotic software testing company from Finland. We have been in the business since 2002, but then starting 2020, we are only purely a product house. Our product is Qentinel Pace, and towards the end, Henri will then tell you more about what Qentinel Pace is. So Kalle, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks. And first of all, thanks for inviting me as a guest here. And we have a lot in common with our company. So very briefly, Eficode is a DevOps company, 15-year-old, basically starting from DevOps, but as you know, it's about development and operations. So we have a lot of design people, coders, doing projects for our customers. We have managed services. We have this platform route, what we are going to touch upon in the later part of this webinar. But it's about how we actually enable our customers to do better software. So it's consultancy, but we have products and we have the managed service side. Very briefly from me and my introduction. 20 years of different kind of projects from huge varieties of industries. Basically, I got my these kind of or like battle scars from the telecom side in the network side, and that's why I'm actually here. So there were a lot of problems that we need to solve on this regard, and now I'm here. So, but yeah, talking about open source. Yeah.
Great. Over to you, Henri, then.
Yeah, thank you. You heard Kalle's story and you heard Nikhil's story. Hi, I'm Henri Terho. I'm the Chief R&D Evangelist at Qentinel. So I do a lot of our research and development work, and also talk about why that research and development work is important and why this kind of open source initiative and new technology initiatives are really important. You heard a little bit about Qentinel, so I'm just going to say maybe also that Qentinel is a robotic software testing company. We're totally focusing on the testing products now and also on quality analytics and being your quality sentinel in there. And we assembled this three-some group that we have here because I think we have a lot to discuss about open source, DevOps, and where the technology is heading. As I think now, if you look outside from our company and into the world, there's a lot of stuff going on that's pretty much enabled by open source and the DevOps movement in the tech sphere. A lot of companies embracing DevOps now, and it's bringing quite impressive fruits to many different industries.
Great. And speaking of hearing about your stories, I forgot to tell mine. Actually, I've worked as a couple of years as test automation expert, and then in a bunch of customer projects building infrastructure and creating test automation. We'll hear more about these stories later on. And then one thing that I also forgot is housekeeping, although I've been reminded so many times of that. So you're watching this on YouTube. There's a comment section where you can leave comments, questions, feedbacks, anything you want to write there. We'll take that towards the end. So please feel free to do that.
Yeah, we'll try to answer your questions. Let's see how we answer them, but we'll try to answer them.
Or Kalle will answer all the questions. We'll just say the questions.
Yeah. I can always answer, but let's see about the quality of the answers.
Yeah. All right. So shall we move on then? Great. Just like a few did you know facts. Henri, why don't you go first?
I can go first. Did you know that there are more than 180,000 open source tools currently in the world? There's a lot of them. They've been used in, I think, all the Forbes top 500 companies, and all of the software intensive companies are using some kind of open source. I bet my head on that every single big company is using tech that's based on open source or has an open source product or tool in use inside of their company somewhere.
And if they don't, then you know where to find Henri's head.
Yes.
Speaking of that, Jenkins, one of the really key open source players in DevOps, an automation platform, has over 15,000 plugins attached to it. So if you're looking for a plugin, go find it. Most likely you'll find one, or then build one for yourself.
And when you're managing Jenkins, it's not a fun game. Been there, done that.
A lot of different stuff moving around. And then again about the DevOps and the speed of deployment that's going on, jumping a little bit moving from the open source to also the DevOps side. Facebook does 50 to 60,000 builds of their Android version every day. This would have been inconceivable back in the day on how you can actually build 60,000 times of your software just for one platform. And you have multiple different platforms that they are also building on. So this is just a drop in the ocean of the whole build amount that the no DevOps technologies can give you.
And for that matter, all the other giants as well, like Amazon, Netflix, you name it. If you are a software house, if you are successful, you probably are doing a lot of code deployments every other day, which was, as Henri said, inconceivable before DevOps. But they have got something right. They have got something which a lot of other companies are either aiming to achieve that or are failing in achieving that. What is it, Kalle? What do you think? How can these companies do such massive deployments and be successful?
Well, I believe we are going to talk about it for 45 minutes. So because like not reinventing the wheel, basically. So we have open source. It's a world is full of tools, and that I have a colleague, I believe, actually online, I hope, that has this saying that a fool with the tool is still a fool. But there's still an massive enablement to build these kind of machines that work on the end user benefit. For example, like Amazon and Netflix, most of their revenue is based on open source and how when they are running their services, and scaling every kind of like manage operational side tools for the infrastructure, how to manage it with scale is open source based.
Right, and I think they have also mastered what back in the days, when you think about mass production industry, I think these software houses, they have mastered how to deploy and develop software at mass level, and like streamlining their value streams, breaking those silos, understanding the customer, doing fast iterations, failing fast and going forward.
Yeah, failing fast, exactly. Like a couple of days there was this one starship coming very hard to the ground, and it was okay because they learned a lot. So that's the point.
Yeah, that's actually SpaceX is a really typical example of kind of the nowadays. Let's do it kind of thinking that how many times did they fail with the Falcon rockets? Many times, and now they are the best in the whole. And they can embrace the fact that they can fail, and they will learn everything from those failures to prevent it in the future.
But still, you have the headlines in the newspaper that SpaceX failed on their launch. Like, come on, they didn't fail; they succeed, and that's the mentality. And about learning and adopting these tools actually, and these technologies that you take into use, see where they go, what you achieve with those, and then adopt and take another hit basically.
Or maybe not adopt, change the tooling if it doesn't.
Yeah, change the tooling. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You are not only using, you are changing the tools for you.
On failing fast and learning quick, I have a really bad joke, but I'll crack it now. There was another guy who made a rocket out of himself and died thinking that the Earth is flat. But let's not go there. That's also failing fast, but that's fatal.
Yeah, you don't want to be on that rocket when it's failing. So that's the point. So you need to teach yourself and your organization. And I actually yesterday, because I need to say this out loud now because I otherwise forget. Yesterday there was this Valohai's LinkedIn posting that MLOps and your continuous delivery is your product. And I actually believe we are touching that point very, very largely in this webinar, that everything what you do in a continuous delivery, we are going to talk about DevOps anyway soon more, but everything what you do is your product. That is the culmination of like how it's behaving to end customers and how the value is delivered to them. So that was nicely put in my mind.
While you're at it, what is DevOps?
So I had this kind of mental, bridge. I have seen that the webinars, they tend to do these kind of
hooks and bridges. That's what we're about.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So what is DevOps? So I am a DevOps lead here, so of course I know. So DevOps started like a community-driven practice of bringing agility to the infrastructure. That's where it started. It's so much more nowadays. Everybody wants to own the word DevOps, because it's everywhere nowadays. So you have like DevSecOps, DevBizOps, whatever. So, but the point is that your organizational capabilities to utilize certain set of practices that have been proven to be very good for you. So, for example, automation, culture, soft, skills, thinking about Conway's law when you develop and design your system, lean thinking, and like these are basically the columns if you use, and if you Google CALMS, so there's a lot about the practices what they use. That's like the top down view, but if from bottom up, actually what we always do in the real life, we implement this value chain, how the changes are as smaller chunk as possible being flowed to the customer, and the feedback loop from every phase back to the people, and basically building the transparency to that. So continuous delivery, if you follow like Fowler and Black, now I forgot the name, but anyway, guys behind continuous delivery. So it's another side of that coin. So it's that kind of like realization of what you think and how you should behaving is the continuous delivery. And in that scope, we are very large now in talking about today about open source.
Yeah, and I think open source brings in a lot of sides to this whole DevOps solutions. As I think most of this revolution has happened because the technology enablers are starting to be there. Everybody has, of course, always wanted to get your software to your clients quite fast, but previously, you had to have if you think at the like Web 1.0 time, launching of the first internet companies, you had to have your own servers in your back room, run it from there, deploy those websites, take the website down to update it, then put the new website on, monitor the traffic maybe to your closet. Maybe you didn't have enough hardware, so you had to buy that. Basically, by making all of these different parts kind of interchangeable, standardized, scalable, you can take it from the web. You can take any of the kind of shared components that are open source in there and kind of build your whole pipeline on top of that. That, I think, has fueled now the whole DevOps revolution, but now it's starting to really affect our culture as well in these companies that are doing it. It's technology-enabled cultural change.
Yeah, and like if you think about where you want to work, if you want to work, for example, you don't want to waste your time in mundane, wasteful things. Yesterday, I was participating in this yrityspäivät in Tampere University. There were a lot of talking about like, I don't want to work in such company that doesn't adapt these things faster. If there is some resistance, for example, adopting like new ways of working, for example, DevOps practices from business side. So from business requirements, everything is built on the value stream, and that's where you need to be agile, and that's like the organizational capability to produce value is the key, and that's why it's very like adaptable from different kind of angles, and it's actually very not so objective thing. So you have a lot of subjecting, thinking there.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's a matter of debate whether like technology enables, or well, is it like philosophy enabled tools, or did tools enable philosophy? But I would say, once you have that aim, what you want to achieve with certain processes, or for example, software development, what we're talking about, once you coin that, I think a lot of ecosystem starts swarming around it, and that's when you have a number of tools that then starts to translate that philosophy into technology.
But it's also, very very briefly, just one thing. So I see this as a kind of two tracks, technology-wise and then organizational-wise. So technology need to go a little bit further, because if the people are adopting the technologies, they need to be able to use them. So, but anyway, the culture needs to be there pushing the technology forward. But in practice, that is how I do it. There is a lot of background noise, sorry.
Yeah, there's a lot of typing noise.
Yeah,
all right. So going forward, famous DevOps open source tools. Starting from Git. What is Git? Why Git?
Who starts? I can go first. So this is what we were talking about with the previous slide. That really, it's like this chicken and egg problem between the tooling and the culture that's happening in here. That there's a lot of different tools that have been coming into the ecosystem in different phases and enabling different parts of this whole dream of continuously building and updating your products or anything else. And it's been, I think it's one of the most important things in here. So it is an open source version control system that's pretty much been standardized around the globe as the #1 version control system. So just a simple application of controlling different versions of your text files basically has become one of the most needed enablers in the whole industry of software development. And you've even started seeing JIT-like features now in Word and other these document editors that typically have done a lot of text editing. So that's also visible in other places than just software engineering. Going clockwise, then there's of course Jenkins in the middle at 12 o'clock position. So that's a task manager, or you can use Jenkins basically to run small tasks. But that ecosystem was something that we referred to in the beginning of having 15,000 different plugins and everything. So that's what's being used to automatically trigger another software when something happens. So a lot of early build pipelines were built on top of Jenkins, that when you put your source code into Git, this automatically triggers a new build, which builds based on that updated source code, your application. And then when we're keeping on going through the whole cycles of here, we have Docker, which basically is the environment where you can dynamically deploy your application. Ansible is a way of writing that code and really making it easier to manage, so you don't have to do it yourself, install everything by hand, but you can actually define by code what you want installed in that whole setup and how that setup has to work. And Nikhil can take the next one or go forward, or Kalle, whichever. So it's a monologue of me.
No, let's go. I believe let's go forward. Sorry, go ahead.
Counterclockwise, I'll start from Selenium and Robot Framework. Well, automation tools for the validation of your test cases. So basically providing you the feedback on your code quality. Then you have packaging tools like NPM, and then container management from an orchestration from Docker and Kubernetes. But let's not get stuck with the tools. The idea is, what I was trying to figure out is, you have DevOps in the center, you have tools around it. I was wondering, is it possible if you take those tools off, can you have a DevOps?
Of course,
if I go first, if we have this saying in Eficode that once you can document it, you can automate it. Documentation. So documentation itself, you are still on mandatory things, but you need a tool to automate. So that's, I believe it's a fundamental force that if you are a one-man company, you can do everything manually. You are doing laundry in DevOps style. So you can do it, but actually doing something when you are sleeping, you need automation.
Right. So to go with that analogy, if I have Word doc, then I can automate everything basically.
Yeah. So nowadays, that's actually. So the Git is very interesting also tool from my profession, because I want that everything is in version control. But if I go to a manager or business, people saying that, okay, you should automate your acceptance criteria as business in a business language, which you can do with gherkin. So you can do given when then clauses in the use cases. Yeah. And then you automate those. But then when I ask that person to go to Git and please go and check the newest version, it's like he would almost like go away from the company then, other than use this kind of technological tool that that he or she needs to do. And then you of course sell Confluence and put a Git plugin there that, okay, now you can see it in a page in a web, So okay, or a direct link. So it's fun. It's fun, right?
Distract the audience away from that rant between business and technology. Let's go to DevOps stories. Kalle, you go first. Your favorite DevOps story.
All right. So we decided to pick like a couple of tools and share our stories, because stories is what we remember later. And this story is related to my personal experience as system engineer or like software engineer. I want to talk about engineering also. So, and why I'm actually in this profession still, because I got a hug in the end actually. So problem was that there was this 300 to 400 people in a couple of years period where they were building products in a telco side, and we were using trunk-based development as a way of working. And the problem was that they didn't have any kind of capabilities to test beforehand when they pushed the code to trunk, and we were doing it with SVN. And there were huge problems when people were, pushing just code, and there were only unit tests basically in their own laptops, and then people were like cutting corners even in that. So it was this kind of 80% red build to 20% of green build. And when that green day came, everybody piled in because you had a code freeze, that you shouldn't be committing on top of broken build. And I was one day, Friday night, doing a commit, and then I got called on Saturday that I broke the build, and I was told to go and fix it, and I went to fix it, but after that I was afraid of pushing the commit button. I was totally afraid, and that wasn't a place where I wanted to be, so I went out of the project and actually implemented a Jenkins plugin that basically took an SVN patch, and then it went to that plugin, and everything was built on top of head before it was actually checked into the SVN. So basically, developers could go and have a lunch in the meantime when this huge machinery, built everything on top of the newest versions, and then they were able to have some kind of inkling that they can push the commit button. And it was funny to 2 years later see Google to come out with their monorepo, and basically they have the same aspect, and they the whole idea is trunk-based development, and basically build the whole tooling around the change management around the source code system, and they had this pre-commit angle. So. And later on, I met a couple of guys from the project, and they didn't know that I was participating in that, and they gave me a hug for it. So because I was saving so much time. So, Finnish man and a hug. What you can do.
Finnish man, an engineer and a hug. That's the most you can get.
Yeah.
Very hardcore.
No money can buy that.
All right. Well, yeah. Great story there.
And the Docker, I will skip the Docker one, but later on, very briefly, 10 seconds. A couple of years later, Docker came and actually would have made my life so much easier on that regard. So that was like the technology I was too early for that. So that was funny to see that, there would have been a nicer solution.
Right. Well, I go next. My story is a combination of Jenkins and robot frameworks, also a new stream of my career development. So I went to a company which is a spin-off within a large company. They had a warehouse management, very complicated system. So you have real robots in the warehouses, then you have the web user interface for it, and then you also have a user interface for the robots, which is running on a native Linux. Basically, DevOps is way farther. We weren't even working in an agile mode, and this is like 6 to 7 years ago. And while developers were building the builds, there were no testers, of course. Who needs testers? So developers were developing the code, building builds, and then also doing the testing. So they only had this happy bots. Then I went there as an intern. I was a language trainee there, but they gave me a task to test it. Manual testing, started writing test cases. all of a sudden you start to figure out that all those happy parts were okay, but then there is like so much that hasn't been covered through this developer testing, and there were a lot of errors there, bugs, if you will. And what I have noticed while I was doing this testing work is there was this chronic conflict that people talk in DevOps, like why even DevOps exists, this chronic conflict between Dev and Ops, that development wants to develop new features, operations always scared to put those things into production or and do the operations because, well, the features don't work in production. And I actually experienced that in live. So we had the operation team sitting next to us and the development team, and there was a wall and there was a lot of shouting going in between that. Well, what I did was I used Robot Framework, which is an automation framework, to basically build all the test automation, especially for the web front. Later on, they also built for the native Linux front. And then there was a guy who built the whole pipeline using Jenkins. So now we had the whole process in place. And trust me, the chronic conflict started to disappear by every build. And from doing like a one production deployment once in half a year, we moved to a production cycle of once in a month, which was a great improvement given that time span was a year. So that's where I understood like how much can you achieve by bringing DevOps in or bringing test automation in. And yeah, so over to you, Henri.
Okay, you guys have been telling about war stories where you did something quite successful with open source. So I'm going to tell a story from a bit of a different angle, how open source basically made the stuff that I did totally irrelevant in one of the earliest companies that I worked for. I used to work for a smaller startup that we did mobile application development on the health tech space. So we did a health tracking application for Android back in the day and built it also on web applications. And what happened was that I was building a versioning control system for different kind of plugins that we had, and we had all of these. If any of you have done web development back before NPM and before JIT, it was really like a chore to start updating jQuery mobile, jQuery, and all of these other kind of different libraries that you build your applications on top of. So it was the early days of even that those libraries existed, and first days of jQuery and the others that really made web development easier. So I used to spend a lot of time developing a versioning control system for this so that we could automatically update the applications in our whole stack so that I wouldn't have to do it manually. But then what happened was that NPM and Node and all of these ecosystems started growing up quite fast. And we noticed at one point that, hey, should we actually also switch to using this NPM, as it seems like we can, even though it's built for Node, you can actually get all of the front-end components from there. We thought about it for a little while. Then we decided that, yeah, let's do it, even though we've invested a lot of resources into this custom system that we did back in the day, or what I did as a summer intern, basically for the whole summer. And then we noticed, well, basically it took us less than a week to convert to the new format. And after that, everything's been working a lot better in that company. Like open source technology has made some parts of the job that I did a lot easier. And even though I kind of lost some efforts in there developing the system by myself, I also, of course, learned something. But after that, the maintenance, the updates, the whole handling of that whole stack is a lot easier when it's handled by the community. And that's also, I think, one of the really key things that happens with open source, that you do not have to take care of everything. It's also the community working on updating that. Our core competence wasn't to build versioning control systems for web page libraries, but that's something that we needed to make the product work. And initially we did it ourselves, but then we noticed that actually we shouldn't focus on that. There's a lot of good ways to handle that from the internet, and it's typically cheaper to even buy a proprietary solution for a really hard problem. And now when you have all of the open source based technologies open in GitHub and whatever, it boosts your efficiency really well. And I'm not jobless, so technology didn't take my job. It just made a lot of stuff a lot easier. So the fear that, hey, open source is coming and makes all of my work irrelevant is total nonsense. It makes your job.
Think about it. What if you could have, while you implemented that open source at that time?
Yeah.
You could have the next Linus Torvalds from Finland.
Yeah, well,
almost a little bit nicer.
Misunderstandings.
A little bit nicer guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, like for example, for the open source, so one point on that, what Henri told in the later part, is that you can get so much learning done based on the open source tooling on your ideas. And if you want to really do it, then you of course check that, okay, what I can use, what kind of culmination of these closed source, open source tools and solution I should use. But you can do almost everything based on open source completely nowadays. So yeah.
So we've actually spoken quite a lot about open source, but maybe it's something that we want to focus a little bit of time on. That what is actually open source and what do we mean by it?
Very good bridging there, Henri. Thank you. What is open source?
Yeah.
How did you guess my slide? Does it mean free? Does open mean free? And I don't think it means free, but then there is, well, it means that the code. Okay, let me tell it, and then you can correct me, fill me in there. So open source means that the source code is available for you to distribute, to read, to modify. It doesn't mean free as in a free beer, but it's free for you to have it and to use it. But then well, in a way, it does translate to being free, because always you can make a copy of it and then it's with you. So in a way, it is free. Or what do you guys think?
Very briefly, from using actually open source. So I believe we are going to touch also that one later a little bit. But so it's free from the start, but when you need to maintain, upgrade, or like you have security holes, you need to always produce a new version from your product, which is using this. Then you need to handle the licenses. You have indirect costs related, but still, those are you need to manage that, and you need to realize that you need to take it in the business decision that okay, how you are going to do that. But otherwise, normally closed source anyway, without integration ability, like good APIs, for example, is much worse. So, in my opinion.
So what you're saying is that the initial cost of getting started with open source, like when you basically take that code from the internet, download it to your computer, that's for free. But then in the longer run, when you're managing it, the running or the operations part of it is rather expensive. That's not for free.
It's like take the Jenkins in use, and then you try to take the plugins into use, and then that exactly that plugin that you want to use, it's not okay. There is a bug that is like 2 years old and nobody is checking, and you don't have time to fix it or know how in that sense.
But that could very well happen also in a closed source. I mean, if you think about if there's a company with a various product portfolio, and they are trying one of their product is a legacy product, and then you're trying to get an integration or a bug fix there, that could stay there for a while as well. But in open source, what you could do is find the time and fix it yourself.
Exactly.
Henri,
that's the core I think on the open source, that if closed source you don't have the possibility of fixing something if you immediately know it's broken. You might put a ticket in some system and it might get fixed in some time scale, but it might be not the most important thing in there. But with open source, you can go in and fix it locally and even commit that change to the whole project to fix it also for others. And I mean, you think about the community, when you have a lot of people doing the same thing, that results in a lot faster fixes, and a total amount of fixes to the actual software gets much bigger than just with closed source typically. So because you have so many eyeballs looking through the code, you typically end up with a lot cleaner code. Not always, but typically. So again, it's a kind of a community thing, so you cannot really control what is important. But if you happen to, typically the most common problems get fixed quite fast. And I think this also bridges us to the is it secure part. So with this fact that so many people are looking into your code and looking at what's actually being done there, and it's a critical part for so many different companies that many people are looking at that, is it actually secure? And when those people do it, they kind of in the same time audit that code. Because with closed source, you typically don't have access even to the source code. You might have access to the end system, but with open source, you can actually dive into the innards and see if, for example, passwords are stored in a sensible way, if inputs are being checked for malicious code code or something like that. So you can actually go and check that by yourself, as it is open.
I would even go that far that closed source is much more secure because of open source. Because they need to be, I don't say better, but they need to appear to be at least on that same level than open source solutions.
But I think there's more to this than just the divide between closed and open source, and we are saying that open is always better, but it's not always true. But what I think is most important to realize is that you can use open source to build a lot of great closed source software with open source components. It helps you, and typically then you can give back to those shared components that are not your core business. So you can focus just on the core business that you're doing, keep that business as the number one thing that you might keep, for example, closed source, and use all of those other parts in this kind of a shared ecosystem of software parts, and really speed up your development and deployment and all of that.
Yeah, you are very important. I must emphasize that it doesn't mean if there is people that are not doesn't know so much about open source. It doesn't mean that you have it embedded, but you always can use it as the build that system that you are releasing and selling, and that's very fundamental thing to realize if there is on the line people that are making R&D decisions, for example. So yeah, so you need to realize that there is so much to gain, I believe.
Right. Yeah. All right. Then going forward from here, speaking about building products or building commercial products on top of open sources, there probably are some license restrictions there. Henri.
Yeah, and this is
about license.
And this is the thing that kind of separates open source from closed source. It's the availability of the code, but there's typically always a license attributed to the code. So it's not just a text dump somewhere on the internet that you can access. That also happens. But of course, there's always some kind of copyright or something else in the modern world attributed to that piece of code. And there are generally two types of licenses in those bits of code. So some of them allow closed source derivatives, so you can build your stuff on top of it, and some that don't. And also here that you can build derivatives out of it doesn't mean that, for example, you might have a build tool in your building pipeline that is something that doesn't allow derivatives to be built from that code, but you can still use that tool to build your application's images, for example, or something like that. This is something that you want to look into a bit if you go into the open source space, but it will take you a couple of days to just figure out what the different licenses are. The most common are Creative Commons, basically do whatever you want. Then there's the version of that with attribution that you have to tell, hey, this is a code by Kalle, for example, if he's released something with Creative Commons, but you can do whatever with that code, but you have to say this was originally done by Kalle. MIT is kind of the same. It's also very allowing, but it also has this way that, hey, please keep this code available, and if you have any kind of fixes on it, please maybe give us some heads up on that and help us in this. But the GNU license is something that says that, hey, if you're going to do some derivatives out of this stuff, you actually that also has to be open source. So there's these kind of sticky licenses, which if you put into your code, it makes everything open source, basically what it sticks into. So be wary of those, but also, as we said previously, open source means open source. So you have to show your open source, actual source code if you do open source coding, put it on GitLab or somewhere else publicly available so that people can actually see it if you're doing it this way. Right. Yeah, something to think about, the caveats that might be happening there, but it's some very big things happening on the open source front, and I'd say every single company has to take open source into use, and they are probably using it. If they are using Windows or Mac or Linux machines, they are open source in some way. Right.
And if you think about, like we have spoken about open source, spoken about DevOps, and how I see it, there are like very coherent cultural parallels between these two philosophies. I mean, of course, we have spoken about like what kind of open source tools we have in the DevOps chain, but there is, in my opinion, there's no functional link between DevOps and open source. Like you could build your DevOps pipeline with closed source solutions, which might be running open source underneath, as Henri just explained. But if you think from a philosophy point of view, they both are targeted towards collaboration, but you just break the boundaries from your teams to across nations and to the whole world that there is. and you break that boundaries. You bring in all the intelligence that there is out there, brain power that there is out there, eyes that are out there to deliver the best quality software that there is.
Yeah, and I must emphasize this point also that in my customer projects, it's usually the problem is that there is bottlenecks in these core competencies, and they have too much ownership of some certain parts of the either the platform or either the whole architecture part or the ops side. And the ops side, you feel like something that I must always touch or try to push more, because dev is usually much more farther away of adopting these ideologies and tools. But then the bridging the link, actually doing the DevOps correct, as a whole, a systematic approach, it is. And inside companies, you should always think about this in like real, open meetings, etc. Okay, do we have technical difficulties, or do I have? Henri, you are muted, but yeah, I'm gonna continue.
Yeah, did we lose Nikhil? Maybe
yeah.
You did. Go ahead.
I will continue. So, but yeah, I must emphasize the point that companies should have their own internal open source. Especially when you have that kind of same technology in multiple different products, you are wasting so much time in different kind of rework and doing wasteful things without that. Could you, Henri, start the sharing?
Yes, I'm just digging through to also share the slides that we have.
And there is delivered fast fail. So I have the slides also here, but yeah, the agility, the definition of agility usually for me is, or like the way you actually achieve agility is to get smaller parts and deliver them faster, so that you are able to do the feedback loops, and then you learn much faster, and then you can get the customer centricity, for example. But in open source, it's also a little bit same. So you don't have those huge releases, because your community needs to be adopting those new features, for example, that we need to do and then learn and take forward. So it's also important that there is similarities with DevOps, because you take that small release and make it as, like, for example, blueprint deployment for the production, etc.
Yeah, and also what's happening with open source is that that might be that you just use the tool because that's something that you always use. But with open source becomes availability, and then becomes kind of this evolutionary pressure that you're choosing the best tools that they are, and the little bit worse tools get left behind. Basically, they get stuck in the mud, and only the tools that the community really likes and that are being used in many different companies become really like the top leaders. And that's why we see this, that there really is not like hundreds of different tools for the same topic in for example, containers. There's now one or two different that have been standardized and have kind of went through that evolutionary crucible to become industry standards, because everybody's looking at them, everybody's commenting that this is bad, this is on the code, this is bad. And it's not just inside the one library, but across all the different container libraries that there were before. And now just the best are left in there. So the kind of evolutionary pressure also is a lot bigger for software projects in the open source.
Yeah, I believe we should go here. What happened? We lost one, but we have two left. yeah.
Let's see if we can get Nikhil back at some point. Hopefully his comms problems get cleared up. So what we were thinking next is that when we're talking about, we've now talked a lot about technology, but it still also has to be a valid business model and a business decision that's happening around open source. And giving away your source code for free doesn't immediately sound like something like a sensible business decision. That, hey, we are giving this code away and this is what we're doing. But through this, you're typically not selling the source code. You're selling the service that the source code implements, for example. So if you're looking at, we've listed 4 different strategies here. Open core is the way that you actually have an open source product. GitLab is one of the ways of hosting your own service or version control on the internet. They are giving you their whole service as free if you want to install it on your own servers. But what they are offering on top of that, as they're like business, is that they will host it for you, they will fix all the problems with it, they will maintain it for you. So that's the way that they are doing business based on open source tooling. And the same can kind of be said on AVS, that they are hosting all of your different open source tools. All the like, most of, I think AVS is running on Linux machines and all of that. And many servers on the internet nowadays are running on Linux machines. Even though AVS is using that as pretty much core part of their business, they're doing their money on the service and not the source code of those instances in there. And do you want to take it to you?
Well, yeah, I can. Okay, we have him back.
All right. Sorry guys. My Mac crashed for some reason. It was like just about to take off. I think it got super heated up and then it just shut down. Sorry for that. But we are back in the show. Yep.
Yeah, great. So we were just talking about the business models, and so Red Hat. This is quite funny for me because everybody has been like for 15 years ago, like you said, Henri, that okay, nobody does money with open source, and this is like this has been the big guy on the block the whole time to actually getting the biggest revenues. Now there's a lot of other players, of course, like AWS, for example, but they have a different angle. So the service here is here, and I feel that the technology-wise, Docker wanted to be the same way, but they failed, I believe, because it was too easy to adopt that technology to another way also. But Red Hat has made a huge progress on the enterprise side on that, and of course the Android then later. So Google realized that if they are not able to manage the platform where they are where the marketing and the advertisement revenue comes from, that they are missing totally the whole revenue streams. This I believe the same problem is in financial sector now, and we don't have yet very nice financial sector companies that are able, at least in Finland, that are able to go back to your money stream, or like how do you use your money, because that is the most important thing. And Android is a very good example. Of course, the marketplace, what Apple did before, and they took it on the Android side, and that created another revenue stream there, and to integrate to the Google services. Did I forget anything?
No, I guess you're right. But then on talking about marketplaces, I mean, thinking about closed ecosystem, Salesforce is one of those. They have like an app exchange. You have over 3,000 of applications there built on top of Salesforce, but it is all closed source.
Yeah. The open sourciness doesn't mean that marketplaces can only succeed with that, but the marketplace has been seen as a really good business strategy in many other places also. So you have Mäkelä and all of that. But let's go forward on the slides. I think we have a couple of
companies to talk about.
Yes.
This is something we touched already, or do you want to still comment on it?
I like a little bit added on. Of course, this is something that is very tangible thing that everybody understands. So if you are in a mobile, buying for a mobile, you are in reality, choosing between closed and open source. And with closed source, Apple is the big guy that has made it very, nicely. Let's take that they are focusing purely on the end, the user experience, and because they are owning all of the code, they don't have that ecosystem. They have the money to do it. I don't see any bad points there. So
doesn't mean it doesn't fail. My Mac crashed.
Yeah. But then there's just one Apple, and kind of like you have one iPhone and one Mac and one. Well, okay, in reality you have different versions of those, but with open source you can basically say that, hey, okay, I want to build my own Android because I'm not happy with any of the others in there, and quite quickly get an Android phone going. And that's why even the Android ecosystem you have hundreds of thousands of maybe nowadays different Android phones and also versions. So that's also a problem with open source, that it kind of is a lot more like Wild West. With closed source, you can basically say that, hey, all of these Apple devices, they work very nicely with each other. But with open source, there's going to be so many different versions available because everybody can do their own if they want to. You will get a fix for your one problem. But what if you want to fix 5 problems at the same time? There might not be a one single open source version of Android that does it the way that you want to. Of course, there's not maybe one Apple device, but that's it.
But let's go directly to here, because that was nice what you said, that like what we see in automotive side. So you have that OEM huge ecosystem, millions of people, tens of millions of people are participating on that value stream to create that car. But then comes Tesla. Is Tesla like closed source for you or not?
No, they're not, because in 2014, Elon Musk came out and said like all the technology that Tesla is gonna do, they're gonna open source it. So, but the car itself might be a closed source. You're buying it. But then thinking about Tesla's technology, I think what they did is that they have advanced quite well in what they developed, and they realized that they can't just fulfill the market by themselves. They need the brain power of the world. So they wanted to create a marketplace, but still wanted to be the leader of that marketplace. They came out and said, well, this is for open source, but hey, we are always going to be 10 steps ahead of you because we know this thing.
And they are licensing again the services on top. So FSD,
right.
FSD is gonna, so full self-driving is gonna be licensed, etc. So
now quite many of the different companies are also getting on the car as a platform business. That I think Qualcomm just released their platform, and even Android is now going out.
Android automotive, yeah, that's true.
There's a lot of these like platforms and open source cars. So we might see a kind of open source car revolution coming in.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys touched on it while I was gone, but thinking about Microsoft, for example, they initially said like they were against open source, and they came out admitting, if not apologizing in public, that they were wrong about their open source ideas. And now you see, well, you have Visual Studio, then you have PowerShell, and then you have some sort of Linux kernel embedded in the Windows.
Yeah.
But like what companies do not realize is that by creating that open source ecosystem, by creating that market, you can create a bigger of a pie than you can individually create.
Yeah.
And I in Finland, when I'm working in Finland, I sometimes see us like too narrow-minded in this kind of sense, because we have these examples from the world. Why won't we do the same? Because our this open source the pie that we are talking about here, we can grow it from Finland also. It's a like global go-to-market model. And I feel sometimes so frustrated on this. I don't know if there's some international listeners there, but yeah, why don't we do this more? Because that's the way we are going to grow through the ecosystem, because IT systems and everything, they are worldwide. And then the business model is worldwide.
Maybe you should send Linus Torvalds a message that he's
yeah.
So, speaking about your frustration of Docker commercializing their product. Did you know, by the way, that
they basically sent their technology everywhere, as you asked, and really try to create the market. So what's the story here, Kalle? Now that you've gotten in fire mode.
Well, I don't know actually all of the twerks here, but I know that in 5 years, the Docker was the most trending Google search in the IT world, and now it's not.
Indeed was. I think they were too late to commercialize on that, and then their technology was so good, they got it everywhere. But then Kubernetes came in as an orchestration platform and said they really killed the Docker marketing. They started talking about, most of people use Dockers inside Kubernetes, but Kubernetes didn't mention Docker. They started talking about containerization. And then Docker came up with another marketing team. What they did was they renamed their open source product as Molby or Mobby, what was it? And the commercial product as Docker. But I don't think a lot of people know about that.
Yeah.
And also one thing that the container technology as a fundamental technology is quite old. So it's from the 90s. So yeah, it was too late for the Docker, but it brought this the container technologies to everybody to use, because it makes the uses of it simple. But then it couldn't be, it couldn't save itself from the underlying forces of that. You can of course adopt different technologies on the side. But it's still there. It's Docker is still the CLI in many places.
Still there, and it's still like the revenues are 100 million, so it's not like gone. In Finnish standards, it would be a big company. But then Robot Framework, one open source generic automation framework coming out of Finland, which is getting very popular across the world. Yeah,
here's what Kalle was talking about. Finnish technology taking over the world.
Yes.
Open source model.
There you go.
Yeah. Sorry.
In robotic process automation, test automation, well, all that automation, you name it.
Good job, Pekka.
Yeah.
And the guys. So I believe we are running out of time. So if there's some questions, we should take it. But
otherwise, you're gonna pitch Eficode route. Go ahead, Kalle, do it.
I will do it because I'm a guest, so I can have one slide. So as I said, Eficode has one product which is called Eficode Route. But it's in this topic, so it's very nicely put and fit here in this whole webinar, because Eficode Route is a vendor agnostic modular platform where you can manage these tools, either open source or closed source tools. So it's everything related to license management, access control, which is very nice, visibility, that one. Because the complexity in the tooling world is that everybody will bring a new tool, and then you have another, and it's another breaking point or step in your value stream. Whenever you are putting more tools to your value stream, you should remove 2. So that would be a nice rule of thumb. But yeah, this is helping the companies to alleviate the pain of managing open source tools in your tool chain, especially when you are not engineering driven company. Like we have public reference like public railroads, VR. They had a huge problem on how to integrate everything together, because they didn't have the capability. So because you have now they have the platform, they are able to start integrating on top those code bases, etc. Yeah, that's my. Should I because I have now the control, I have the power. So should I go to the next one?
If you want to switch from your software pitching to the next
Kalle,
one.
do you want to participate in our podcast or not? If you don't switch the slide, we're not inviting you to the podcast. That's how it goes.
Okay, you can have this. Okay.
Okay, so Kalle was talking about how there's this constant stream of different open source tools coming in, and how they are basically doing their business on top of open source by integrating and managing all of that open source. We are doing also the services part of offering the best kind of environment to run open source robot framework also on the cloud. So what we are offering is a hyperscalable test automation platform in the cloud. We want to be the best offerer of testing resources in the cloud. We see that testing is also going to the cloud, and you really have to test your systems continuously nowadays because of this open source management issue, and also because of the fact that it is not just your internal open source libraries that might update whatever day of the week that happens, but actually nowadays you're typically building your application on top of APIs. You're pulling information from other third-party systems. They might change their APIs at some point, and you need to know when that change happens, and that's also something that drives you towards DevOps if your systems that you're using also use DevOps. So what we are offering you is speed, scalability, and predictability of your open source testing platform, and all the good features of actually open source libraries of robot framework. So we don't.
And how many times Henri said open source and that? Really good. I'm gonna stay the good guy and not pitch anything here. So going forward.
You are the open source guy here.
Yeah, not pitching anything.
You're not selling anything. Me and Kalle are selling everything today.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we are approaching towards the end of our webinar. There has been no questions, but comments saying thanks for the webinar. What's the next big open source trend in DevOps? Oh, there's a question. So that's a question. What's the next big open source trend in DevOps? I was reading it out. In DevOps, that the field and you are moving towards.
If I can take that one first, and then you can continue. The pain of, because underlying tooling has been changing so much based on the technologies, what they actually manage, like for example, Kubernetes, there is like huge gains or like developments on the visibility on what is happening under the hood, because visibility brings transparency, and transparency brings a lot of good decisions on any kind of level in the organization. And I want that the main open source development the community, I should be there myself, to drive the dashboards, the machine learning on like how your pipeline is behaving, and like the KPIs that is produced from the the pipeline and the platforms. That is something very, very large, and in my opinion not still untapped from open source point of view. There are licensed tools to do that. You have Grafana, of course, etc. But truly, this kind of vendor and technology agnostic visibility and KPI management.
Yeah, I agree with Kalle that the transparency is something that's really happening on open source and through the whole technology stack. You need to have visibility into all parts of your development pipeline so that you can optimize it. And now that more and more you bring in open source tools, that's kind of happening directly because you're already opening a lot of those silos for outside source code and outside influence basically into your build pipeline that you have to monitor. And what's happening is that it's becoming also so complex through all of this management that you cannot really think about it in absolute terms. You have to start thinking about statistical methods. You might have 1,000 containers, millions of test runs. So you cannot go through every single one of those individually. So you need to have tools to manage that in better ways and do statistical analysis. And also this whole trend of non-deterministic systems, so AI and all of these are also going to disrupt the whole DevOps and testing pipelines because they do not behave deterministically, because all of the testing infrastructure, for example, since the 90s has been pretty much built on the way that, hey, the test will always pass or fail. But now we are going into a time that the test doesn't pass or fail. It might pass 99% of the time, but sometimes no, and that's fine. And that's something that also we have to start looking more through dashboards, through operational monitoring, and not just blind deterministic testing. There will always be a place for deterministic testing, but there will be other technologies in there as well.
Yeah. Well, I don't have a lot to contribute there, but there's one thing that I've been wondering, that there hasn't been, on transparency, on the note of transparency, there hasn't been that many tools when it comes to monitoring open source tools. So open source monitoring tools. I think that space is not that much explored yet. You have a few, I can't remember their names, but not something which is very well known. So often you have people adopting Splunk, for example, which is a rather famous cross-source tool there.
Yeah, and I know that there is a lot of open source agents, for example, that you can adopt your technologies to these kind of closed source solutions. Yeah. One addition on here, if you think about truly the Google machinery, and if they would actually open source the whole machinery, and like for my point in the earlier part, that you are your continuous delivery capabilities and the culture, of course, that how you use it. Your product is that, and you can like 50,000 commits per day in a monorepo with machine learning testing, so that they will automatically, see where your code has been changing, your business flow. Then you are able to, the machine will automatically run everything, and that's of course the main closed source system of Google. That I believe. So the software engineering side and truly that if you want to do complex like that kind of tens of thousand people doing one thing, and like there I need some kind of, or there is so much potential from open source community to build there, I believe.
Yeah, and still kind of underlining something that I feel is that DevOps in itself is the next mega trend in a lot of spaces that it wasn't previously. For example, automotive is one that's going to have to transition into this continuous deployment model from releasing one car a year with one software version a year, as all of the underlying systems that they are connecting to, for example, the internet, you have to update your systems if you are connected to the internet, because the whole internet ecosystem will make sure that if there's something to exploit, it will be probably exploited. So you have to fix it quite fast. And it forces you to this DevOps. So this enforced and DevOps is something that's going to happen big time in the next 5 years.
Yeah, auto industry for one, and then all the other conventional machinery industries, heavy machinery, elevator industry, forest machinery industry, I mean, you name it. I think they all will go through these transformations, which, well, how we call it as the early adopters, and then these are more like force adopters, because you don't want to go DevOps, but all the other people around you, the whole ecosystem is going DevOps, and now you're forced to adopt DevOps in your software development.
Yeah, you are not being able to today in this to be competing without or competitive without these practices. That's the fundamental thing. We have a DevOps 2021 event coming later this spring, and it's already there. You need to adopt or die, basically.
Yeah.
And that's why if there's some business people on the line, it is scaring sometimes maybe, but it is fundamental thing that if you have digital assets used by some B2C or B2B, you can see from Forest, for example, that 84% of the organizations that are not able to do the transformation to be more agile in their digital assets management, they are going to go out of business. You can see it from S&P 500. There is no 3M there anymore, or Walmart is not on the top anymore. It's about the FANG, so Facebook, Amazon, Netflix. Yeah, so that is the fundamental mega trend. And so I as a personal message for everybody on the line, ask from technical guys that what this means, because it's just the conversation needs to be starting to mix the oil and water, as I always say.
All right, so Kalle, I did notice that you have mentioned now second marketing name dropping you did there about Eficode DevOps. So your counters too. But on that note, really thank you guys. Our host is pushing us to close this session. We would like to talk. We probably will record a podcast with Kalle, Henri on our, what's the name of that, Code Sauna podcast. Thanking you. You have our contact details on your screen. If you liked us, then you can reach out to us. If you didn't like us, then you can block our email addresses. But on that note, have a great rest of the day. Thank you, guys. Thank you for the good discussion, and see you.
Thank you.